Welcome in this third and very last part of this Sonny Chiba retrospective. By an interesting coincidence, when I'm shooting this video, it happens to be the birthday of Sonny Chiba. So I take this opportunity to wish him a very happy birthday, even if this video will be put online much later. So we had stopped our marathon with Shogun's Ninja in 1980. And we will move on with the rest of the decades of Sonny Chiba's career, and we will start with the year 1981, during which Sonny Chiba appeared in Samurai Reincarnation, but also sometimes called Samurai Resurrection, and which original title is Makai Tensho, directed by Kinji Fukasaku. What's the story of Samurai Reincarnation? We follow Amakusa Shiro. Amakusa Shiro was one of the leaders of the Shimbashi rebellion, which was a rebellion by Christian followers against the edict of the Shogun, which was forbidding the practice of Christian religion. And so there was an uprising which was led in part by this Amakusa Shiro, and there were a very bloody reprisal by the army of the Shogun, and they were all executed, including Amakusa Shiro. In Samurai Reincarnation, Amakusa Shiro is still alive, and he basically gives up his faith. He embraces some kind of evil force, and through this he gets some powers to resurrect the dead, some magical powers. And he's going to resurrect several people, several famous people, including, for example, the famous samurai Ronin Musashi. And with their help, he's going to get his revenge toward the shogun and the people who have killed all his followers. A couple of interesting notes regarding Samurai Reincarnation. It is actually an adaptation of a book by Futaro Yamada, which follows roughly the same storyline, but with interesting differences. For example, in the book, it's not Amakusa Shiro who is the source of all this resurrection. It's actually another follower called Mori Soiken who learns the ninja arts, and it's through the ninja arts that is going to resurrect these different personalities of Japanese history, including Amakusa Shiro. But in the following adaptation, quite often it's going to be Amakusa Shiro, the source of the all events, and it's not going to be, these powers are not granted through learning some kind of black magic ninja arts, but actually through some kind of rejection of the Christian God. So we can guess it's some kind of satanic force or something like this. So interesting change there. And another thing which is worth to note, in my opinion, is that it was not actually Kinji Fukasaku who was supposed to direct Samurai Reincarnation, but Hideo Gosha. Hideo Gosha, the director of Hunter in the Dark, who actually got some trouble with the judicial system around that time, it seems, in Japan, and so he was unable to direct the film, and so it went to Kinji Fukasaku. Samurai Reincarnation has a very strong opening when you see the battlefield, the last battlefield of the Shimbashi rebellion, with a lot of dead body, with some very strong lightnings. It's a very striking image, and it's a very good introduction in the film. And it has also, and the film also has a great final in the Osaka castle, which is burning, so a lot of flames all around the the main characters for their final struggle. So once again, very strong visuals there, opening and ending. Unfortunately, between this very strong opening and very strong ending, there is a very long film which takes itself way too seriously, in my opinion. For example, the way Amakusa Shiro recruit his team members takes almost 1 hour to take place. I mean, it's very long. It's way too long for such a film. So basically it tries to be a bit of both, a bit comic book and quite serious at the same time. And by trying to achieve these two, not necessarily contradictory, but two different orientations, I think it ends up failing, because it's not really that convincing as a comic book, because it's way too long, way too serious. But at the same time, it's not serious enough to work that well as a serious drama. So it's quite a frustrating film, this Samurai Reincarnation, where you see the potential, you see it could have been good, but it ends up failing, in my opinion. In this film, Sonny Chiba plays once again the part of Yakuza, which he plays in Shogun Samurai, with a great success in the 1978 film. Once again, he's really great in it. He has all the charisma, all the striking appearance of Yakuza works really well with him. So he is really flawless. There is no problem with his performance. He's really great. And if you are into Sonny Chiba, I think this film is still a must-see despite its flaws. But as I said, he cannot revert the problem of the film just by himself. We also have some interesting supporting characters and interesting supporting actors. We have Hiroyuki Sanada, we have Ken Ogata, who is more an actor specialized to work with author with more artistically oriented film rather than these more commercial efforts, with playing Musashi here. So interesting cast, there is some production value, but at the end the film is not really that convincing, in my opinion. It's a bit frustrating film to watch. And for the video game lovers, I already mentioned during Shogun Samurai that the character of Yakuza, at least its appearance, in the SNK game Samurai Shodown, Samurai Spirit, was based on the Sonny Chiba incarnation of it. Well, it's the same here when it comes to the final boss of the video game, Amakusa Shiro. It's completely taken directly from the way it looks in Samurai Reincarnation. So if you want to play a Samurai Reincarnation, if you want to redo Samurai Reincarnation, you just need to play the Samurai Shodown, Samurai Spirit SNK game, and you play Yakuza and you fight until having the final confrontation with Amakusa Shiro. Fortunately, in 1981, Sonny Chiba was in a better film than Samurai Reincarnation, and that is Roaring Fire. Roaring Fire, directed by Norifumi Suzuki, so the director of Shorinji Kempo, The Killing Machine, or Shogun's Ninja, so one of the specialists of exploitation cinema who was doing quite action-oriented film during that time of his career. And here we are in a pure vehicle for Hiroyuki Sanada. So in the same kind of mold that Sister Street Fighter or Dragon Princess had been for Etsuko Shiomi. It's really a film which is based on him and which is supposed to showcase his charisma and skills, and it actually delivers quite well. Roughly the story of Roaring Fire is Hiroyuki Sanada playing two twin brothers. One of them is killed in Hong Kong in the very opening of the film, and then we follow the other one who has been raised in the US and who didn't know about the origin, about the other member of his family, and who come back to Japan to discover his original family, including his sister played by Etsuko Shiomi. He also meets his uncle, played by Mikio Narita. Mikio Narita, who was one of the regular of Toei film and of Bad Guys during the 70s and early 80s, a great actor. And Hiroyuki Sanada will quickly discover that actually the one responsible for the death of his parents is his uncle, and is going to do whatever he has to do in order to get his revenge. So fairly classic story, really nothing that special about that. But we have a lot of great action scene, a fast rhythm, some interesting characters. For example, the sister of Hiroyuki Sanada, played by Etsuko Shomi, is blind, so she's basically doing a kind of a variation of Zatoichi. And we also have Sonny Chiba, who is playing an Interpol agent, but it's Norifumi Suzuki, so just having someone play an Interpol agent is not enough. So each time Norifumi Suzuki will have a little something to make the character more interesting. So I already gave an example with the sister of Hiroyuki Sanada, and that's also the case with the character of Sonny Chiba, with an Interpol officer but who is also a magician. Each time he will do some kind of magic tricks, and that will really make the character stand out and be more interesting than just your regular Interpol officer in this kind of film. In the same spirit, for example, with the character of the uncle played by Mikio Narita, who is the bad guy. For whatever reasons, in many of the scenes he has some kind of Nazi symbol behind him. So one time he has a big portrait of Adolf Hitler. In another case he has some flags, Nazi flags in his house. It's really just to give some kind of personality and to have some kind of symbol of evil, which works, but that's pretty much it, because there is absolutely nothing in the film which makes you believe that he is a Nazi itself. It's just a visual way, I guess, to show he's a bad guy and to bring a bit of personality to the film in a way. What is especially interesting in Roaring Fire is first that we have at some point a fight scene which involves both Hiroyuki Sanada and Sonny Chiba, and it's very nice to have them finally fight together, but not against each other as it was the case in Shogun's Ninja, but together as a team, each of them taking some bad guys. So it's very nice to see, and it shows clearly the kind of difference in action style that Hiroyuki Sanada and Sonny Chiba has. You can see Hiroyuki Sanada is someone who is using more kicking technique, who is more faster in a way and more elegant, closer to some kind of kung fu or Beijing opera style, if we can put it this way. And on the other hand, we have Sonny Chiba, who is much more heavy in his strikes, who is more karate oriented, so a bit less fancy techniques and more some strong blocks and a strong punch. So that makes for an interesting contrast during these action scenes. Only one little flaw during this action scene is that they tend to be separated. They are basically, we see some shots with Hiroyuki Sanada fighting some of the bad guys, then we see another shot with Sonny Chiba doing the same, but they don't appear much together in the same shot, and that's really too bad. I think it would have been even better if we could have seen both of them together on the screen busting their action moves, but still quite a nice sequence, which is really to the benefit of Roaring Fire. And another thing which is quite interesting in Roaring Fire is that a good part of it was actually shot in Hong Kong. And you already know probably by now that I really like to see this kind of foreign crew here, Japanese crew, shooting in Hong Kong and seeing foreign action stars being in Hong Kong. So that's very great to see Hiroyuki Sanada walking around in Tsim or elsewhere in Hong Kong. He has a nice action sequence where he is chased by bad guys and he will fight in some famous places of Hong Kong. So we will see him at some point in next to the Manmo Temple in Sheung-wan. Then in the next shot he will be in Tsim Sha Tsui. So if you know the geography of Hong Kong, you know that's completely inaccurate, but that was usually the way when foreign crew were shooting in Hong Kong, and sometimes even in Hong Kong films they don't necessarily respect the geography that much, but it's okay. It's really great to see him there anyway. And there is some kind of little nod to his mentor, to Sonny Chiba, during a stunt where he is at the top of a bus and he managed to catch a signboard, and then he ends up landing on another following bus. So it's a kind of variation of the stunt that Sonny Chiba did in Golgo 13 Kowloon Assignment. So that's quite nice to see the student doing some kind of variation of what the master had done 4 years earlier. So that's really nice. So all in all, Roaring Fire is really a very fun, very entertaining action film, mostly to the glory, mostly to showcase Hiroyuki Sanada, which it does very well, but with also a presence of Sonny Chiba, which helps enhance the film. So all in all, really a good movie to recommend, a good movie to watch. Still in 1981, Sonny Chiba was in the Bushido Blade, directed by Tom Kotani. Bushido Blade is a weird case. It's an American-Japanese co-production, which at first glance seems to have been made following the success of Shogun. Shogun, which was a very famous, very successful TV series, an adaptation of the book by James Clavell with Richard Chamberlain and Toshiro Mifune. And there was really a small craze after this TV series, after its success, and several co-productions being made in Japan in the early 80s. But actually the film was shot before Shogun was aired on TV, so it cannot have been made in order to capitalize on that. I'm not completely sure if it was just something which was in the spirit of the time, and so it's just a coincidence between this movie being produced, or if the producer was already aware that there would be a TV adaptation of Shogun and was already preparing for that. So I'm not completely sure about that, but the film has a bit this kind of vibe, this kind of meeting East and West in the early 80s. But while I think Shogun is a pretty good TV series, that's not something I can really say about Bushido Blade, unfortunately. What's the story of Bushido Blade? We have the Commander Perry, the American commander who forced the opening of Japan to the world, and is supposed to bring back a katana as a gift to the president of the US. But this katana is stolen by a samurai faction which is against the opening of the country, and so several of the American sailors will have to find it back, and they will team up with a samurai, and the samurai will be our dear friend Sonny Chiba. As you may notice, this story is actually very similar to what had been done in the Western Red Sun by Terence Young with Toshiro Mifune and Charles Bronson. But this time, instead of having this team of American and Japanese in the US, it's a team of American and Japanese in Japan, and that's basically the main difference. But while Red Sun was actually a pretty entertaining film, a pretty entertaining Western, and a fairly good meeting of the West and the East, this one is very lackluster. It never managed to go further than the usual cliche, and that's quite obvious when you look at the character of Sonny Chiba, with really your expected cliche of the samurai who follows the Bushido, who is very straight, who is very who don't speak much, these kind of things, and that's a bit too predictable and too obvious. There are though some aspects of the film which could have led to something more interesting, but once again they are not really well played, and I'm thinking here of the character played by Laura Gemser. Laura Gemser, who is this Indonesian actress who made her name in exploitation Italian cinema. She was famously the Black Emanuelle, and she appeared in many Italian films of the 70s, and weirdly enough she is in this Bushido Blade, and she's playing the adopted daughter of a samurai, and so she is herself following the Bushido code and these kind of things. And to have a character like this, who is obviously not from Japan but who has to follow the Japanese rules, I think could lead to some interesting questions, some interesting idea, and it could also be a character who would be a bridge between the American side and the Japanese side. So there is a lot of potential which could be exploited with this character, but unfortunately the movie don't really use it very well. It's once again just scratch the surface, and we have what we expect, being that she will of course fall in love with the good-looking American hero. So very predictable, nothing really interesting comes out from it. The production value is okay. It's shot in Japan, so you have the same kind of costume and this kind of thing that you can expect from a film shot in Japan around that time. That's already a good thing, but that's clearly not enough to make the Bushido Blade an artistic success. Even the action scenes are a bit lackluster. So unfortunately, on almost all fronts, this Bushido Blade is a disappointment. In 1982, Sonny Chiba appears as a cameo in The Fall Guy, directed by his usual director Kinji Fukasaku. I already mentioned that Kinji Fukasaku around that time was trying to reorientate his career, to try different directions. So he did so by doing samurai films, he did a bit of science fiction, he was a bit trying different things, and The Fall Guy is part of that, and which would be one of the orientation for the rest of his career until the end of the 90s, which are films more dramatic, more drama oriented, and also more feminine. So with an emphasis on romantic relationships, on women characters, this kind of aspects. And The Fall Guy is part of that, and it will be an orientation which will be quite successful when it comes to film festival, when it comes to film awards. The Fall Guy will get some awards at the Japanese Oscar, to put it like this. So it's something which will be quite successful with critique, with the Japanese intelligentsia, let's put it this way. But I'm not that convinced, at least when it comes to The Fall Guy, but I'm going to explain a bit more. So what is the story of The Fall Guy? In The Fall Guy, we discover the behind the scene of the Japanese film industry, and we follow a star, an action star, who is kind of seeing his career declining, and who is hoping that his last film is currently shooting, will finally help him to get back in the top of the stardom, of the Japanese stardom. And this guy has always a team of stuntmen working with him. And at some point there is another actress with who he had a relationship, who comes to him telling him that she is pregnant from him. But this actor is very afraid of the consequences of this pregnancy if it was made public. So he asked her not to talk about it, and he asked one of his team members to take care of her. And of course, when this guy is going to do so, there will be some kind of romantic relationship developing between them. So you have really two aspects in The Fall Guy. You have on one side a look at how Japanese film industry was working at the beginning of the 80s, and on the other hand you have a love story with a bit of drama in this relationship between this actress and this little stuntman. And my problem is with the romantic relationship. I think the starting point of it is a bit weird. I find it hard to really believe in it, to go into what the movie is trying to tell us. And the way they develop their feelings is a bit too artificial to my taste. I really have difficulty to believe in the genuineness of their love relationship, and so that's always a bit of a problem for me when it comes to the Fall Guy. But the Fall Guy is still interesting enough to watch, and I think that's it has more to do with the way it depicts the Japanese film industry of the time. So you can see a lot of things happening, how they are making the film at the time, and you have some touching scenes. There is, for example, a whole sequence where you have this little stuntman who is going from one set to another. So he goes to a samurai film where he's some little soldiers who is going to be killed by the main star, who is played by Hiroyuki Sanada. Then as soon as he's killed, he rushes to another set, which is a modern action film, in order to be gunned by the hero, which is played by Sonny Chiba. And so you can really see the difficulty, what it is to be a stuntman, always putting your physical integrity on the line in order to make the hero looks good. And so that's very nice, and that's the cameo of Sonny Chiba. So he appears as this hero in a modern action film and killing our little stuntman. There is also a whole story about this guy doing a huge, very dangerous stunt, which is falling from a very high stairs. And so there is really, it really shows the commitment, the working ethics of those stuntmen in the Japanese film industry back then. And so that's really a nice tribute to them, and it's an interesting look at how Japanese action films were made back then. So just for that enough, I think The Fall Guy is recommended. If you buy into the love story, then that's even better, and you will probably love the film, and that's really great. Unfortunately, as I said, I found the love story a little bit artificial, and it was hard for me to really go into the feelings of the characters. But still, a fairly recommended film, an interesting film once again, by the master that is Kinji Fukasaku. Still in 1982, Sonny Chiba appears in Ninja Wars, directed by Kosei Sato. Ninja Wars is basically the ninja version of Samurai Reincarnation, meaning that it is a film about ninja, but which takes itself extremely seriously. You have to understand that ninja films were extremely popular in the 60s through the series of the Shinobi no Mono. And there is basically two schools of ninja films. You have the serious school, which take them fairly seriously, and they have some very good stealth skills, some very good fighting skills, but they are not invincible at all. And so this realistic school is more like Shinobi no Mono series and a few other films. And you have the more fantasy-oriented ninja school, in which our ninja have really some crazy magic powers. They can take possession of another body, they can do a lot of crazy things. And that was there was quite a few films like this produced in the 60s as well. And Ninja Wars is on the fantasy side. Here we have some people really using crazy dark magic in order to achieve some nefarious goals, and our ninja will also have some powerful magic of his own, even if a bit less comparatively. But that's more the fantasy oriented. And when it comes to the fantasy ninja films which had been done before, many of them were under the exploitation trend. So it was quite often an excuse to have naked girls, to have crazy stuff, to have a bit of violence, but also with a bit of a fun aspect. It was not taking itself too seriously either. But with Ninja Wars, that's not the case. Here, it's really taking itself very seriously, and as it is the case in Samurai Reincarnation, I'm not sure that really benefits for the film. So in Ninja Wars, we have a weird plan being set by a wizard, an evil wizard called Kashin, who is played by Mikio Narita in a weird Fu Manchu style makeup, which I guess means he is originating from China. I think sometimes I will have to do a video about how Japanese cinema shows a Chinese character, because it's always very very superficial and very stupid in my opinion. But anyway, that's him. That's the wizard, the evil wizard, and he's going to help a daimyo, a lord during the Sengoku era, so that's the civil war era of Japan, to become the new leader, the new master of the whole country, the new shogun. And for that, he's going to create a love potion, which this daimyo will be able to use to get the woman he wants, and through this woman he will be able to become the main master of the whole country. And in order to do this love potion, this wizard will kidnap the twin sister of this woman, who didn't know that she existed, and he's going to do a lot of weird stuff on her in order to get the components of the potion. Unfortunately, this girl has already a lover, and this lover is Hiroyuki Sanada, and Hiroyuki Sanada is going to do all he can in order to stop this nefarious plan. Weird story, but once again, as I said, which takes itself way too seriously, and you have Hiroyuki Sanada, who is doing a good job, because that's Hiroyuki Sanada is a great actor. He has a lot of charisma, he has a lot of good athletic abilities, but the whole movie is quite dark. It's a bit faster in pace, at least, than Samurai Reincarnation, which was 2 hours long. This one is a bit shorter, so that's a bit of an advantage there, but that's still not enough to really make it a good film. The characters are not extremely sympathetic. You don't really support them that much. It's a lot of suffering and pain actually in this film, and that's not really, that doesn't really help it to make you interested in what the story happens to be. So it's once again quite a frustrating experience, because you can see there is some production value, there are some prestigious actors, there is an attempt of doing something serious, but just the original material, in my opinion, is not worthy such attention, and it's all very dark, but not in a good way, for a movie which should be more comic book oriented, more action oriented, and a bit more upbeat. I think it's really just too dark for what it's trying to tell, and so that doesn't play to the benefit of the film, in my opinion. Sonny Chiba is playing another Yagyu family member, but this time it's not Yagyu Jubei, it's Yagyu Chizaemon. He is playing his usual supporting part when it comes to these films, which are supposed to put forward his protege, be it Etsuko Shomi, be it Hiroyuki Sanada. So he only appears in a few scenes there and there in order to help the main character, and so that's what he does. He appears a little bit at the beginning of the film, and he appears once again at the end of the film in order to help Hiroyuki Sanada, and that's pretty much it. There is really not much to say about him. Of course, he's very good in his scenes where he appears, but as there are very few, that's not enough to improve the film. We move to 1983 with Sonny Chiba appearing in Legend of the Eight Samurai, Satomi Akenden, directed once again by Kinji Fukasaku. I already talked a little bit about Legend of the Eight Samurai and the video I made about the influence of Star Wars on Japanese cinema, but still I'm going to talk once again of the film, especially as I like the film. I think it's a good, entertaining, heroic fantasy Japanese-like film. It's an adaptation of a famous book from the 19th century, which was written by Kyurute Bakin, and that is the story of 8 half brothers during the Sengoku period, the Civil War period, who were born from a dog, and they would have some kind of adventures. And so we here, it's a little bit rewritten, reoriented with a princess to help. So these 8 samurai are going to appear in order to defend this princess and to help her get back what is hers after the invasion by some kind of evil queen and her dark troops. So the kind of story you can expect from something a bit like Lord of the Rings like thing, but with a Japanese flavor, and that's for the best here. That was a big production. That was really a big budget at the time, produced by Kadokawa, the producers of GI Samurai. So the production value is really on the screen. The costumes are beautiful. You also have a very good photography, which was not given in Japanese cinema during the 80s. During the 80s, most of the Japanese film had this kind of dull gray, almost TV movie photography, but that's not the case in Legend of the Eight Samurai. You have some very bright colors, and that really helps to create this heroic fantasy kind of mood. You also, of course, have a great cast. There is a bit of pop blockbuster flavor as well, with the main actress, the princess to defend, who was actually a pop idol back then. So that's really the arrival of the pop idols into the film industry, which won't necessarily be a great thing for Japanese cinema in general. But here it kind of works because there is all these great old school actors as supporting cast, and so that's okay, even if in her case she's a bit more limited in acting. You also have some pop songs, this kind of thing. So these kind of things would be trademark of Japanese blockbusters for the years to come, but sometimes not necessarily for the best. But here in Legend of the Eight Samurai, I think it works fairly well. You also have great sets, especially the castle of the bad guys. It's really some very nice artistic direction there. And you also have the Japan Action Club action scenes, which at this time of the existence of the Japan Action Club were really, I would say, at the peak of their abilities. They were all very well trained, had a lot of experience, and so they were able to deliver on every front. So with interesting choreography, with a good execution, with a good way to shoot it and to edit it after. So that makes for a very entertaining film. Legend of the Eight Samurai is a nice upgrade after the failed attempts that were this kind of comic book blockbusters that were Samurai Reincarnation and Ninja Wars. This one is finally the right one to go, in my opinion. That's the one which get the right tone, which really assume its heroic fantasy comic book orientation fully, and which deliver the most entertaining spectacle. And that's a really strong recommendation for me. We jump to 1985 with The Last True Yakuza, directed by Kosaku Yamashita. So we are back in a Yakuza film. As you could see from the retrospective of the film I have mentioned before, that's not something Sonny Chiba had done for a little while, and that's because the Yakuza trend had basically died in the end of the 70s with the end of the Jitsurogu of the realistic, cynical Yakuza films, which had been popular, which had been made popular by Kinji Fukasaku and a few other directors. This type of film lost their appeal at the end of the 70s, despite some attempt to bring it back. And so there were still some Yakuza films being produced, but with much less ambition, much less budget, and so with a residual commercial success. The last true Yakuza is a bit more ambitious in its attempt, but it's still not that convincing, especially compared to the heyday of the genre that were the 70s. This one is trying a bit to mix the Ninkyo style, so with this chivalrous Yakuza, and still have a bit of realism in it. So a mix of Ninkyo, a bit of Jitsurogu, but it doesn't really mix well because they are kind of contradictory to each other. So at the end we have a fairly predictable rise and fall Yakuza film, which is technically okay, but really nothing memorable or nothing outstanding. And when it comes to Sonny Chiba, he has a supporting part there, but his part is actually quite interesting, and even if the film itself is average in my opinion, if you are a Sonny Chiba fan, I think it's worth checking it out. So his character is someone, a milder version of the character he was playing in Okinawa Deathmatch or Okinawa Yakuza War. He's not as crazy as that, but he's someone who is ready to go for action, who is ready to fight when it needs to, or to use violence in order to eliminate an opponent of the Yakuza family, this kind of thing. So he's a man of action, and so he's going to put it in action and ends up being jailed for that. And while he spends most of the film in jail and we don't really see him there, so we don't see him on the screen, but a lot of the action, a lot of the events happening in the film are triggered by the fact that he's going to be released from the jail. So his character is still important in a way in the story, despite him not being on the screen that much. And when he finally comes out of prison, what is interesting in my opinion is that he's not the same man as he was before. He is a bit confused, he's a bit lost, he doesn't know how to find his new place in life. If the values that he had embraced, he was more kind of following the Yakuza code, if it's really going to benefit him once he's released from prison. So there is a bit this confusion in the character, which I find quite interesting, and which in a way reflects what was of his career, because at this point of his career his heyday were behind him, and he was not anymore exactly this action guy. There would still be some action film he would appear, but his best day as an action hero were obviously behind him, and so there is some reflection, there is some thinking to do about what kind of orientation he must give to his career, and I think that's kind of reflected by the character he's playing there, and so that makes it interesting if you are a Sonny Chiba fan. But as I said, the film itself is not as interesting, is not as successful as it should be, and that ends up being an average Yakuza film. You are a typical average Yakuza film, not bad by itself, but nothing outstanding either. In 1986, Sonny Chiba is in Tokyo Blues, directed by Aoki Kadokawa. So Aoki Kadokawa is the big boss of the Kadokawa company. He is the man behind this new orientation of the Kadokawa company, which was originally a book publishing company, and which he transformed into a film, a producer of films and producer of very ambitious and very costly films, with some success, with G.I. Samurai, with Virus, and a couple of others, with the Legend of the Eight Samurai. And this man was obviously someone who was very into films, was very dedicated to filmmaking, and so that's kind of logic that he would at some point want to direct his own film, and so that's the case here with Tokyo Blues. And Tokyo Blues is obviously a tribute to the film noir genre, so with all this kind of dark atmosphere, with some cops who are not necessarily following the law, with gangsters, with femme fatale, with music players, with clubs, with a lot of smoke and very jazzy atmosphere. So really it's all about that in Tokyo Blues, and if you take the film for that, it's actually quite successful. Kadokawa and his team really manages to create some kind of alternative reality, a Tokyo which looks more like a Tokyo from the 1930s, with all these kind of characters you can expect from film noir. So the mood, the atmosphere is very well made, is very faithful to its original genre, and just for that enough, and especially if you like this kind of genre, then you should check Tokyo Blues, because you will have a blast with this atmosphere. Unfortunately, in my opinion, by concentrating that much in respecting this kind of alternative cinematic world, it kind of loses focus when it comes to the characters and to the story itself. The story itself is fairly predictable and nothing really new, and the characters are more like stereotypes than people of flesh and blood, and that makes for a not as much engaging viewing that you could expect. So you kind of watch it politely, you appreciate the efforts which have been put in it, but you are never really into the characters or into the story, and that's the final flaw which the film has to face, and which doesn't make it an artistic success, in my opinion. When it comes to Sonny Chiba, he just has a cameo. That's probably because he had been in several Kadokawa productions before, and Aoki Kadokawa probably asked him to appear in the film as a favor, which he did. So he is a Yakuza boss in a funeral scene, and he appears like 1 minute, yeah, maybe even less. So just a fugitive apparition. Nice to have him here, but nothing really special to comment on his performance there. In 1987, Sonny Chiba appears in Sure Death Revenge with his usual director, with his good friend Kinji Fukasaku. Sure Death Revenge is a samurai film which is part of a longer film series which focus on a samurai character who is kind of looked down by his peers. People think he's a bit of a lazy, he's a bit useless, but he's actually a very smart guy. And when comes the night, he acts as a justice enforcer. He's going to look for the people who have done bad things and who have managed to escape it, and is going to punish them himself. And so in this specific film, in Sure Death Revenge, we have the death of a former samurai, which seems to be accidental, but actually is not that much. And the daughter of the guy who died is going to hire our superhero in order to avenge her, and she will actually hire another man in order to have a revenge, and this other man is Sonny Chiba. It's actually a nice little film with some kind of a bit of a detective story, because you have to discover why this guy was killed, why it was attempted to pretend it was an accident. So there is all this detective story aspect which is interesting, and at the same time the main character is quite interesting himself. That's a good contrast to have him appear a bit useless during the day, who is looked down by the other samurai of his clan, but actually being smarter than them. I think there is also an interesting message from Kinji Fukasaku about the way he looks at the Bushido, because during the opening scene there is some kind of a violent fight happening with all the samurai trying to flee, trying to avoid being hurt because of this fight happening. And so he is one of them. Our main hero is one of them, but for whatever reason he is the only one who is punished for his behavior because it was not faithful to the Bushido code. He was not a good samurai. But all the other characters, all the other samurai actually did exactly the same thing as him. And so there is a lot of hypocrisy. There is a lot of hypocrisy going on there. And I think that really represents what Kinji Fukasaku thought of the Bushido code in general. He really thinks it's bullshit in the same way that he thought the Yakuza code was bullshit, and he showed it in the film he made in the 70s. So I think that's a nice little critique of this in this film. At the same time, you have Sonny Chiba playing this wandering assassin using two young kids, an adopted daughter, an adopted son, in order to help him carrying his mission. And that makes for an interesting dynamic between the three of them. The main problem, in my opinion, with Sure Death Revenge is the problem which I always complain about when it comes to Japanese cinema of the 80s, and that's the photography. While in Legend of the Eight Samurai we had a very colorful, very lush photography which was great, here we have this usual gray TV movie-like photography, and that doesn't help. That hurts a bit the film. I think that's really too bad, but still the characters are interesting enough, the story is interesting enough so that you can just forget about that part. Interestingly also, we have a little fight scene, the last fight scene with Sonny Chiba's character, in which they are moving him and his opponent from one house to another, breaking everything on their way. And that's interesting because that's kind of a prototype of the final action scenes of Shogun's Shadow, which he will do 2 years later. So that's interesting if you already know about Shogun's Shadow, to see him already kind of preparing to, already trying to do something with this concept, and we will push it even further 2 years later with Shogun's Shadow. And so 2 years later, in 1989, we have Shogun's Shadow, directed by Yasuo Furuhata. Shogun's Shadow is once again, like in Shogun Samurai, a story of succession, a story of struggle for the throne, for the status of Shogun. And so in order to protect the legitimate heir, a group of samurai will be gathered, headed by Ken Ogata, and they will have to defend him, to bring him to the place of power so that he can become the real shogun, while there will be some rivals who will do everything in their power to for him to not achieve that, to not succeed and take his place on the throne. So a mix of the Seven Samurai and the Dirty Dozen, this kind of spirit there. And Shogun's Shadow is really a movie which is made for action. It's really dedicated to action. The story itself is okay. The characters are interesting enough. They all have very clear personalities, a clear fighting style, a clear look, very strong look, and that helps for you to relate to them, to find some interest in them, and to be emotionally invested in them, at least the minimum needed for the film to work. So the story makes sense, it works, and the characters are strong enough for you to be interested in them. But clearly the main orientation, the main interest of the film is to deliver some entertaining, exciting action scenes, and that's where it succeeds, and that's where Shogun's Shadow is a great film, in my opinion, is that it's one of the last great action film of Japan, in the sense of an old school action film, not something full of CGI, full of special effects. They will still be doing these kind of things later, but the old school Japanese action style being on display here. And when I say that, it's especially the style of the Japan Action Club. It's basically a showcase for the Japan Action Club. They really are able to show all the creativity, all the expertise in action, and it makes for a delightful entertainment. It makes for a great film, especially because we have Sonny Chiba playing a character who is kind of similar to the one he was playing in Hunter in the Dark, the Hideo Gosha film, in which he was the main henchman of the bad guy, and he was the physical presence. He was the man who was threatening the hero. And so once again, that's what he's playing here. He is someone very physically powerful, very charismatic. Each time he arrives on the screen, you know that something is going to happen. You know that there is a real threat for the heroes, and they are not going to escape without any harm. So he is a very commanding presence, and he has still all his physical abilities required when he's fighting himself. You can really feel the power that he has. You can really see the skills that he has, and so it's really a great to see him deliver once again for almost the last time in a way, to really show off what he's able to do. In the characters of protecting the legitimate heir, we also have a Shaolin monk, which is interesting because that's actually a real wushu champion. It's the co-star of Jet Li in Martial Arts of Shaolin, which has been brought here, so he's able to really show his expertise in wushu, and so that's great, and that makes for a more believable Chinese character in a Japanese films than many of the others we had encountered in the previous film being discussed in this retrospective. Another thing of interest, that's one of the chase scene when the armies of the bad guy is closing on our heroes and they have to escape on horses, and then you have a whole action scene based around that. By the way, if you are an animal lover, be mentally ready, because it seems some of them have suffered quite a bit, but that makes for quite impressive scenes, even if I'm not sure that was really for the best of the animals. And so during this sequence you have a pop song made by the Alfie, and I must confess, the first time I saw the film and I heard this song, I thought that was extremely bad taste. I thought it was completely breaking the mood. It was not the right thing to do. It really spoiled the scene, and it was a very bad choice. But actually, since then, I've watched the film several times, and now it's actually my favorite scene of the whole film. I think it works very well. The song of the Alfie, Get to Run, is one of the greatest in my opinion. You can check some of the other songs they have done. They actually are some of their concerts on YouTube, and they are a pretty good rock pop Japanese band. And so this scene now is my favorite, and that's one I always come back to. I like sometimes to just watch it by itself, not watching the whole film, but just watch this scene, because I think it's a great mix of a powerful action, powerful visual, and a very catchy pop rock song. So I really like it, and that's a good symbol of the modernity in a way of this Shogun Shadow, this last attempt of doing old school Japanese action film with a lot of creativity, with a lot of expertise from the Japan Action Club on display here. Now we are going to discuss a film in which Sonny Chiba actually doesn't appear, but it's still a very important film for his career. It was made the year after, in 1990, and it's called Yellow Fangs, so directed by Sonny Chiba. Yellow Fangs is a story set at the end of the Meiji era, early 20th century in Hokkaido. So Hokkaido, which is still under development, and you have a giant bear which is killing people around, and especially young girls, and we follow a team of 5 hunters led by Bunta Sugawara in their quest to manage to kill this bear. And during this quest they will also encounter a young girl who has lost all her family to this aggressive bear and who also wants to have a revenge. So this film, as I said, was the first directorial effort for Sonny Chiba. He actually directed a little bit of things before. He had directed some TV series episode, and as a founding member, as the leader of the Japan Action Club, there is no doubt that he also probably had a say or had a direct implication on some of the action scenes made by the Japan Action Club. So he already had a bit of experience. Still, in order to help him, he also could count on Kinji Fukasaku. Kinji Fukasaku took part in the script writing, helped on the planning. It's not very clear if he directed some scenes of the film. It seems that's not the case. It seems he didn't direct anything on Yellow Fangs, but maybe it would require further investigation. You have some great shots of the landscapes of Hokkaido, so these snowy landscapes full of a majestic mountain, and with a very nice photography, very colorful, so many sunsets and sunrise. That's really a very nice showcase of Hokkaido with a good reconstitution also of the time. So technically speaking, Yellow Fangs is a very recommendable film. The story itself is not necessarily what you would expect from a film directed by Sonny Chiba, but the characters are well described enough that you will care about them. And you have Bunta Sugawara, which is very good as the leader of the hunters. You have Hiroyuki Sanada, who is basically the main hero of the film. And you have enough development on his character, and especially also on the character of the young girl who wants to avenge her family. Was also a past story with Hiroyuki Sanada, and who is going to rekindle to him. A lot of that is actually at the heart of the film. It's more about the story of these two characters, the story of their relation, more than just the hunt for a bear. On that aspect, the film works pretty well. Where the film, unfortunately, falls a bit behind is the way it deals with the bear. If you remember, I already talked about having a bear in a Sonny Chiba film in the very first video I did, and that was about a karate bear fighter, when Sonny Chiba, playing Masoyama, had to fight against a bear. And the fight itself was completely ridiculous because it was just a poor guy in a costume, and they never managed to make this bear convincing. And unfortunately, between Karate Bear Fighter was made in 1975 and between Yellow Fangs was made in 1990, it seems the technical expertise of the Japanese film industry had not increased by much, and we still end up having a poor guy in a bear suit during some of the most intense fight with the bear, and that doesn't help making the film convincing. It's not as bad as Karate Bear Fighter. It's not as ridiculous. You can see that there has been more care put into it, and they really try hard to make it convincing, but it's not there yet. I mean, you still feel and see that you have a guy in a costume or a big fake bear, and so you never really believe in the threat of the bear. They tried also to avoid the problem by shooting a real bear in many of the scenes, many of the long shots. But of course, when you have some direct interactions, when you have some real action between the human characters and the bear, you have to use tricks, you have to use special effects. And in this case, the bear costume is still not believable, is still as unbelievable as in Karate Bear Fighter, and that's really too bad. That really doesn't help the film. That push it a bit down, and that's really unfortunate. Still, does it make Yellow Fangs a bad film? No, Yellow Fangs is still a fairly good film, fairly recommended if you like Japanese cinema, but of course if you like Sonny Chiba, because that's almost his only film, the only film he directed, so it makes it for a must-see watch despite its flaws. The film, unfortunately, was a big commercial flop. It was a disaster. It didn't get many people in the theaters, and because of that, because it was self-produced by Sonny Chiba, he ended up being in a lot of debt, and he had to sell a lot of his assets in order to reimburse these debts. He had to sell his house, he had to sell some restaurants that he had invested in, and he also had to sell the Japan Action Club, so his baby. And that's even more ironic because Yellow Fangs was made as a tribute, was made as a film for the 20th birthday of the Japan Action Club, and so this tribute to the Japan Action Club ended up killing the Japan Action Club the way as we know it. So it's very ironic and very sad at the same time. And I think this label of the 20th birthday of the Japan Action Club may have hurt Yellow Fangs in a way, because when you see this Japan Action Club label, you expect to see action. You expect to see a lot of the people who have been in the Action Club. You expect to see Sonny Chiba, you expect to see Hiroyuki Sanada. Okay, you got Hiroyuki Sanada, but you also expect Etsuko Shiomi, you expect Kenji Oba. So these people who have been through the Japan Action Club and who have been made action stars of their own through the apprenticeship of the Japan Action Club, and they are not in this film. And so that's a disappointment first, and also you expect to see some action scenes with fist fight, with gunfight, with stunts, and you don't really have that much there. It's not there. It's not in Yellow Fangs, and so I think that may help understand why the audience was not there, why they didn't go to see Yellow Fangs, because that didn't deliver on what the Japan Action label was promising you in a way. And so in my opinion, that makes Shogun's Shadow being the real tribute to the Japan Action Club, the real last hurrah of the Japan Action Club. That's really what you expected, and not what you ended up having with Yellow Fangs, which is, as I said, a good film by itself, but that's not what you expect when you see the Japan Action Club label. And so, unfortunately, as I say, that was a big disaster for Sonny Chiba. And because it was a big disaster, because he had to sell so many of his assets, that made him reconsider his career, and so he decided to move his career in another direction, and that would be try to make his place in Hollywood. And so in 1992 he appears in his first real Hollywood film. So he had already been in some Japanese American co-production, in several of them, but in 1992 he is really in a fully American film, and that is Ace's Iron Eagles 3, directed by John Glenn. John Glenn, who is a director of several James Bond, that's him who did For Your Eyes Only, that's him who did License to Kill, so a fairly competent, a fairly okay director when it comes to Western style action film. Unfortunately, here he is dealing with the Iron Eagle series, which was some kind of opportunistic series trying to surf on the success of Top Gun. Top Gun with Tom Cruise, directed by Tony Scott, which was a huge success, and so that made some producers trying to copy them on this Iron Eagle series with Lou Gossett Jr. was in this spirit, but of course with much less budget, with of course much less talent, be it behind behind the screen or on the screen. So it's basically much more like B movies compared to the more blockbuster aspects of Top Gun. And so in this Iron Eagle 3, we basically have Hollywood trying to reframe the Cold War with its current pet peeve with what it was very active at the time, which was the war against drug. So to explain it more clearly, we have a group of veterans of the Second World War who are now doing some kind of air show recreating the fight of the Second World War. So we have a German pilot who is piloting a Messerschmitt. We have an English pilot piloting a Spitfire, and we have a Japanese pilot here, Sonny Chiba, piloting a Zero. And so they are doing this kind of show for the public, and they are all very good friends because they are now part of the capitalistic world, of the democracy world, who are the friend of the US. And we are going to help Lugerson Jr., the American friends, to intervene in some kind of Latin America state, a Latin America dictatorship, which is also dealing with drug trafficking, and they will intervene and help this bad dictator being overthrown to the benefit of the US and the world. So really it's typical of the kind of B-movie, American B-movie of the time, with a very superficial vision of the Latin America. We even have some kind of Nazi advisor to the Latin American drug cartel. So it's all the cliche you can expect from American B-movie when it comes to this kind of stories or this kind of theme. And you really need to put your incredulity, disbelief aside, especially at the end of the film, when you have these veteran pilots in their old machine who have to fight against some modern jets. It's very hard to believe that they will be able to beat them, but of course that's what will happen in the film. And so that's not a very good movie. It's one of those typical American B film. It's not that bad. I mean, technically it's still kind of okay, but it's still fairly generic and hard to believe on many aspects, unfortunately. Sonny Chiba, as I said, played the Zero. Is the representative of the Japan side here. He's okay, but you can feel he's not completely at ease with his lines, and as there are several pilots, he's not really one of the main characters there. So it's not that great to see him in the film. It's still better to have him than not, but he's not really at his advantage here. And to make things worse, sorry, I'm going to spoil a bit the film, but he's one of the few pilots who end up being killed during the final fight, and I find it a bitter pill to swallow. It looks a bit like there is still some resentment from the American scriptwriters about the war with Japan, and so even if he's now part of the good guy, he still has to be killed. Or maybe it's because around the time that the movie was made, there was this anti-Japanese, anti-Japan trend in American film because of their bubble, of their economic bubble, which made them buy a lot of American company and stuff like that. So I'm afraid there is a bit of resentment, a bit of this trend going on in this film, despite its good intention when it comes to framing Japan as the good guy. There is still some resentment there, and it shows itself during this final scene in which our Sonny Chiba is unfortunately killed. So average B-movie, your typical American B-movie, not really worse, not really better than the kind of films that they were producing around that time. But still, when it comes to production value, that's actually the best which Sonny Chiba will encounter during this early 90s period of his career where he's trying to have a new career there. And we will see that with the two following films he did in Hollywood. But before we reach that point, there is another film he did in Japan during this year, 1992, and that's Triple Cross, directed by Kinji Fukasaku. Once again, always Kinji Fukasaku. And this movie is actually an attempt by Kinji Fukasaku to redo a Yakuza film. And contrary to what is often the case with Kinji Fukasaku's film, in most of his films he's kind of siding with the young characters against the establishment. But here we are following a group of old Yakuza, who Sonny Chiba is one of them, and we are going to team up with a very young gangster for one last one last attempt to make money for them. And contrary to what happens in most of his films, he is going to be more sympathetic regarding this old Yakuza rather than the young one, the young gangster who is not following the rules. And so that's quite new for him. That's kind of unusual, but it works pretty well in this film, especially because of the casting, because of the presence of Sonny Chiba. Unfortunately, I must confess, I haven't been able to rewatch the film since I watched it like 10-15 years ago. So my memory of it is a bit vague, but it was a good try. It was a good modern Yakuza film from Fukasaku, from what I remember, and I really enjoyed it. And I still think it was a pretty good performance from Sonny Chiba. So if you are missing seeing Sonny Chiba in Yakuza film, in good Yakuza films, Triple Cross was a good way for you to have your Yakuza Sonny Chiba fix. Aside from Iron Eagles 3 and Triple Cross, Sonny Chiba was in another film of 1992, and that is Fighting Fist, directed by Kaze-chan and directed by Sonny Chiba himself. Co-production between Hong Kong and Japan. For the longest time, I must confess, I was convinced that Sonny Chiba didn't direct anything and his name was put there as a marketing ploy in order to attract customers. I was convinced of that because I thought that after the disaster that was Yellow Fangs, he would not be willing to be behind the camera once again to direct a film. And especially a film like Fighting Fist, which is a very B movie in the worst sense of the meaning. It's like the worst of the Hong Kong B movie with the worst of the Japanese B movie. It's as you can guess from this description, it's not a good film at all. It's very lackluster on many aspects, and so I was convinced that Sonny Chiba could not have made something so bad. But I wasn't sure, of course, and so I actually reached to Kaze-chan, the director of the film. I'd already tried to interview her before, but for whatever reason it didn't work. But this time it worked, and so I was able to discuss about the making of the film with her, and she actually confirmed me that Sonny Chiba directed part of the film. He was the director for the Japanese scenes, and he was also there during the shooting of the Hong Kong scene, so he was in Hong Kong with Kaze-chan, and he was advising, he was proposing, he was kind of co-directing, but not fully, because at the end of the day, when it came to the action, when it came to the Hong Kong scene, that was Kaze-chan who had the last words. So it's really a co-direction there on Fighting Fist, and Sonny Chiba is indeed at the very least 50% the maker of this film. But that's not really to his credit, as I said, because that's a very lackluster, disappointing B Japan Hong Kong action film. He appears also, he has a small cameo at the end as some kind of weirdly corrupted police officer. But the main star of the film is actually Shogo Shiotani, who was a Japan Action Club former member, who was potentially an action star of his own. Was enough charisma, but is not really well served by the by the script, by the action scenes. The action scenes are extremely disappointing. There is not much going on there. It's very short each time. The only action scenes which is worth, in my opinion, is a fight between Shin Carlock and Ken Lo, which is decent, but it's once again it's fairly short, and it's nothing that incredible either. Don't expect Ken Lo, Jackie Chan, Drunken Master 2 like. It's decent, but nothing really that great either. And the rest of the action scenes are very disappointing in general. You can see Shogo Shotani probably has the skills, he's able to deliver, but they most likely didn't have enough time, didn't have enough budget, and maybe not a good choreographer also being there in order to deliver the good action scenes that you can expect and when you watch this kind of a B action movie. So Fighting Fist is a very disappointing film, not recommended in any way, but still, if you are into Sonny Chiba's career and you are curious about seeing what he has done as a director, of course you have to check it, because that's one of the only 2 times that he was a director for film. You also have to be aware that there are actually 2 versions of the film. One, the Hong Kong version, which has a bit more action. The fight I was talking about between Ken Lo and Shin Carlock is actually only in the Hong Kong version. And you also have a Japanese version which is a bit more violent, which is a bit more gory. But at the end of the day, whichever version you watch, you are not really going to have a great time, I must tell you. So be aware of it. So we continue in Sonny Chiba's attempts to conquer Hollywood in 1994 with Immortal Combat, directed by Dan Nera. In Immortal Combat, Sonny Chiba is a police officer who is in a team with the wrestler Roddy Piper, and this team is going to be sent to some kind of resort in which there are some underground tournament, underground fights, and people disappearing, and they will realize that it was actually in order to create some kind of super soldiers who feel absolutely nothing and who follow orders. So you can recognize the kind of story which have been made by countless American direct-to-video action films. There is really nothing interesting when it comes to the story being told here. It's as generic as it comes. So that would make this Immortal Combat one of the worst Sonny Chiba films in his attempt to become a Hollywood star, but actually not that much. And it's actually the opposite. I would argue that Immortal Combat is probably the best film he has done in the US. That doesn't mean it's a great film by any standards. It's still a direct-to-video B or even C film. It's nothing great. It's nothing really outstanding. But it managed to be entertaining thanks to a good chemistry between Roddy Piper and Sonny Chiba. And that's really unexpected. If you had told me that a buddy movie with Roddy Piper and Sonny Chiba would work, I would really not have believed it. But actually it does. There is really a good interactions between the two with a lot of comedy. Sonny Chiba seems also to be more at ease with his English lines compared to Iron Eagles 3. And so that makes for a pleasant viewing to have these two guys going at each other, throwing jokes at each other. That's actually pretty entertaining. And at the same time, you also have some fairly decent fights. Once again, don't expect anything outstanding. It's not Hong Kong style from the 80s. It's not even Japan Action Club standards. But once again, for direct-to-video American film of the 90s, it's quite decent. You can see Sonny Chiba still have some athletic abilities, some skills. He's still able to show off some of his expertise in the action field. He has some fist fight. He's also using a katana, of course. That's kind of a given when you are doing a film in the US and that you are a Japanese actor. But it works pretty well if you can forgive the uninteresting story being proposed there, if you can forgive the very mundane photography, the lack of production value, and you are able to concentrate on the fun relationship, the good buddy movie vibe between Roddy Piper and Sonny Chiba, and enjoy the action scenes on display, well then Immortal Combat is at the end of the day a decent film to watch, and as I said, the best of his film in the US, surprisingly enough. And if that's the best of his movie in the US, it's because the next one, the one he did in 1995, is a failure on many levels. And this movie is Codename Silencer, directed by Tadin Sue. And in this film, Sonny Chiba is playing some kind of elite assassins, some kind of American version of Golgo 13, who ends up being betrayed after one hit and who is sent to jail, but he managed to escape the jail, and then he's going to take his revenge on the people who have betrayed him and the police officers who have arrested him. And so we will follow actually the other side. We will follow the police officers with Robert Davi as the lead, and we will try to put an end to the revenge of Sonny Chiba. So the casting superficially is interesting because you have Robert Davi, who is one of those supporting actors we love to hate, so that's nice to see him here having the leading role. We have Sonny Chiba. We also have Brigitte Nielsen, who was a sex symbol of the 80s. She was already kind of near the end of her career there, but still she still has some kind of physical presence. We also had Jen Michael Vincent, who was the Mr. Supercopter. So a fairly interesting casting, not of huge star obviously, but of the kind of supporting actors we like to see. But unfortunately the movie doesn't deliver at all, because we never got to understand why Sonny Chiba is supposed to be such a great assassin. Actually, nothing he's doing in the film is really that outstanding or that impressive. The action scenes are very lackluster. The film is very talky. There is not a good rhythm being handled by Tadin Sue, the director. So it's very disappointing on many levels. The final of the film, the final action scene is very emblematic of the failure of the film in our opinion. It's a chase scene in which Sonny Chiba is driving a tram and Robert Davi has to try to stop him, but it's extremely unconvincing because the tram is going very slowly, and so all these stunts which are supposed to be impressive are nothing of the sort. It just shows that it's extremely slow and they are doubled most of the time. It could have been successful if there was a good director, if there was a good team, if they had enough time, but at the end of the day it just highlights the flaws of the film. It highlights all its shortcomings, and that makes for a very lackluster ending scene, which is perfectly fit, I guess, for a movie which is lackluster by itself. One of the potential saving grace the film could have had was the relationship between Brigitte Nielsen and Sonny Chiba, because the one who is going to help Sonny Chiba in his quest for revenge is Brigitte Nielsen. They are a couple in the film, and that's an interesting idea, to have an older Japanese guy being with this Western sex symbol who is very tall. It's very original. It's very different from what you could expect, and so I think there was something interesting there potentially, but it doesn't work at all because there is no chemistry at all between Brigitte Nielsen and Sonny Chiba. They are not believable as a couple at all, and so it's another failure for this film, for Codename Silencer. which is basically the last straw in Sonny Chiba's Hollywood career. I guess at this point, after making this film, he finally realized that he would not be able to make it in the US, and he gave up his idea of having a career in America and went back to Japan, for the best in a way, because he would be able to appear in more films there. But actually he got a boost in his career around that time, and not thanks to Hollywood, not thanks to Japan, but thanks to Hong Kong, because he was cast in 1998 to play the main bad guy of the Stomriders, directed by Andrew Law. And the Stomriders was a huge blockbuster from Hong Kong. It was a very ambitious project by Golden Harvest to try to bring back the audience, the Hong Kong audience, which had been decreasing for a few years already by then. And so in order to bring back the audience in the theaters, they made this adaptation of a famous comic book, a famous manhwa, with Andrew Law behind the camera, and with a lot of special effects, a lot of CGI, which was kind of new in Hong Kong at the time. They put a lot of money in it. They also went to shoot in mainland. They also got a lot of famous Hong Kong actors of the time. They had Aaron Kwok and Ekin Cheng as the new face. Not so new for Aaron Kwok, he was already in the business for a while, but still they were like the popular face of Hong Kong cinema at the time, the young popular face, and at the same time having a lot of famous actors in supporting parts. You had Anthony Wong, you had Alex Fong, you have a lot of these people. You have Yu Rong Guang, and also some newcomers, young popular newcomers, actresses, being Shuki, being Christy Young. So once again, a lot of ambition, a lot of money, a lot of talent being put in this film to try to reinvent the wuxia-pian, the night films. And in my opinion, the bet was kind of successful. I kind of enjoyed the Stomriders. It's not a perfect film for sure. There are still a lot of things which are not that convincing. For example, I'm not convinced by Ekin Cheng's performance, who is very wooden. There is some deficiencies when it comes to the special effects down there, as you can expect from a new technology being used in Hong Kong cinema. Sometimes there are also some weird things happening in the script, which is probably due to the comic book adaptation nature of the film, with characters popping up. You don't really know who they are. So there are flaws, yes, that's true, but at the same time, there are enough good things for you to enjoy. I kind of like the main storyline, which is very Shakespeare-like, with a lot of family betrayal happening, and I think that works pretty well. All the artistic direction is great. There have been really a great job, a great work being put there with majestic sets, with beautiful costumes. So all this atmosphere, all the artistic direction of the film is top-notch. And in general, even if there are flaws in the special effects, they work pretty well to this day, in my opinion. But the thing which makes the Stomriders successful, in my opinion, is actually Sonny Chiba. He is absolutely perfect playing this Lord Conqueror, this kind of wuxia-pian style dictator who is ruthless, but still have a little bit of humanity, a little bit of emotion in him at the same time when it comes to his daughter. So he has all the charisma, he has this magnetic presence, very theatrical in a way, during the whole film, and he helps make the film a success. It's quite similar to what happened in Master of the Universe, the adaptation of the famous cartoon with Dolph Lundgren, which was made at the end of the 80s. A film which really benefited from the presence of Frank Langella playing Skeletor, playing the main antagonist of He-Man. And each time he was appearing in the film, he really made the film great because he was delivering his line like a Shakespearean actor. He was bringing a great presence, and each time he was in the film, he made the film work, and each time he was not in the film, then the film flattened. And that's a bit the same here. Each time you have Sonny Chiba on the screen, you are mesmerized, you are really into it, you love what is happening. But when he's not there, well, that's another story. It's much less convincing. You are less into the film when you have Aaron Kwok and Ekin Chang. But so for Sonny Chiba, the Stomriders is one of the last great part he is in, and that's really a joy to see. If you like Sonny Chiba, you will love seeing him there. The film, as I said, as it flows, it's not a complete success, artistic success, but it has, I think, enough good things for you to have a good time watching it. And as I said, in my opinion, it's still a must-see for Sonny Chiba, for the end of the career of Sonny Chiba, one of his last great roles. Commercially speaking, Stomriders was a big success, and so that gave a small boost to Sonny Chiba's career, and he would appear in several Hong Kong productions, and he would also appear in other Japanese films of the period. One of the films he did following the success of Stomriders was Born to be King, which is another film with Andrew Law behind the camera, and which is the last installment of the Young and Dangerous saga. The Young and Dangerous saga was an attempt to recreate the triad movie trend during the time of the Underverse, or during the 95-98 time period, and it was fairly successful. They managed to really get some commercial success, and they were made very quickly. The 3 first installments of the series were made in a very short time, with Andrew Law, Wong Jing, and Manfred Wong behind the scene, and Ekin Chang, Jordan Chan becoming the face of this new trend of triad characters, of triad films. It was an interesting attempt, which in my opinion is not that great. It's basically reusing all the ingredients which had been already used in a better way, in my opinion, by other directors in the 80s and 70s, but still, at least it was bringing a bit of fresh elements. It was trying to do something kind of new with the old ingredients, and it managed to be entertaining enough at the very least when it comes to the 3 first installments of the series. Then after the 3 first installments, they took more time in order to produce the sequels, and surprisingly enough, while it should have benefited the story and it should have benefited the film, it didn't work that well when it came to the sequel. And Born to be King is the very last sequel, the very last film of the Young and Dangerous series, where they go to Japan, and of course we have Sonny Chiba playing Yakuza boss, who will be involved with the Young and Dangerous triad, and there would be, of course, some problems and some fights going on. What you can expect from a triad film. I must confess, it's been a while I've seen the film, and I haven't been able to rewatch it for this video, so my memory of it is a bit vague. But as far as I remember, it was pretty dull and boring, not much happening in the film. I don't think Sonny Chiba was a problem, but he didn't manage to save the film by itself like he was doing in Stomriders. He didn't manage to rise the bar one level, and so at the end we have a fairly disappointing ending for the Young and Dangerous saga with this Born to be King. In 2002, Sonny Chiba was a small part, almost cameo-like, in Deadly Outlaw Rekka, which is a film directed by Takashi Miike. Takashi Miike around that time was becoming a name to follow, was becoming a director of importance in Japan, thanks to the success of the V-Cinema film he had been doing for several years, thanks to the success of the Dead or Alive series and a few other films. And Deadly Outlaw Rekka is a more classical Yakuza film. It tries to find back a bit of this Jitsurogu vibe, so the realistic, cynical film made by Kinji Fukasaku in the 70s. But obviously there is much less care, there is much less budget in order to make such a film, so it's not as good as what Fukasaku made in the 70s. Still, if you are really missing this kind of Jitsurogu film, or if you have already watched all the classics from the 70s and you still want more of this kind of realistic Yakuza battle, Deadly Outlaw Rekka is not a bad choice. It's still fairly entertaining and made with enough professional skills behind the scene and in front of the camera in order to have a good time watching it. Instead of Bunta Sugawara, instead of this kind of emblematic actors of the Yakuza genre, you have Riki Takeuchi. Riki Takeuchi, who was becoming the face of this kind of new generation of Yakuza films. But let's be honest, he is far less charismatic than Bunta Sugawara and the other actors of the 70s. Basically, Riki Takeuchi has two ways of acting. Either is very reserved, very limited in his emotions. Either is overacting like crazy. And in Deadly Outlaw, Rekka is more on the reserved parts, but that's probably fitting for the role he's playing. With the kind of outburst of violence we can expect from the genre and we can expect from a director like Takashi Miike. So that makes for a fairly entertaining, low-scale Yakuza film. Sonny Chiba is playing a Yakuza boss, of course. That's going to be the kind of part he would be playing over and over for the rest of his career. He does a good job. He's a bit manipulative. He's pretending to be a good guy, but he's actually trying to take advantage of the power struggle happening between the Yakuza gangs. So that's nice to see him here. It's great, but of course it's a very small part, so he cannot really affect the film one way or another. But still, a mild recommendation for this Deadly Outlaw Rekka if you are into the Yakuza film genre. In 2003, Sonny Chiba is having the last film of this very strong collaboration between him and Kinji Fukasaku, as he appears in a cameo for Battle Royale 2 Requiem, the very last film directed by Kinji Fukasaku. And unfortunately, a disaster on many aspects, mostly artistic. Battle Royale was the last great film by Kinji Fukasaku. It was a big commercial success. It was a real final masterpiece in his filmography, and it created a lot of buzz also because of its subject, because of its very controversial nature. And the second film, while most of the people agree that Battle Royale was a great film, most of the people also think that Battle Royale 2 is a complete disaster, and unfortunately I agree with them. It was a disaster, but the question of who is responsible for this disaster is still up to debate, because Kinji Fukasaku started shooting the film. He died in the process, and that was his son Kenta Fukasaku who ended up shooting the rest of the film, but it's still very unclear who did what exactly on the film. And when, like me, you are a fan of Kinji Fukasaku, you would tend to think that if the film was unsuccessful, if it was a bad film, it probably is the fault of his son Kenta rather than Kinji, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I don't want to lay the blame on Kenta Fukasaku because we don't really know exactly who did what, and because Kinji Fukasaku was still involved in the script writing. I mean, he was probably the driving force in the script, and there are still some elements in the scripts which could have made a good film, in my opinion. I actually think the idea of the starting point of Battle Royale 2 Requiem is interesting, being the fact that we follow these young people trying to fight the regime, trying to fight this dictatorship state, and trying to create a new society. And in order to create a new society, they have to go through some kind of terrorism. And I think that's actually a positive message, and maybe you will be surprised by that, but because I believe that terrorism is not something which is bad by essence. Terrorism is just a tool in order to achieve a political goal, and you will find it justified based on your own political orientation. If you are against some kind of dictatorship, you will justify the fact that they are using this kind of way in order to achieve this goal. Of course, all of us, most of us, all of us probably would prefer that this kind of change happen pacifically, and that there is no suffering, there is no death, there is no violence. Of course, I agree with that. We should try to have change being made through a pacific means. But unfortunately, in the society we live in, there are some situations in which you cannot reach this kind of change without violence. That's unfortunate, that's not a good thing, but that's the reality. And I think that's what Battle Royale 2 Requiem is trying to tell, and I agree with this idea. So in this way, I think the starting point of the film is not bad, and especially to say such a thing after the 9/11, where we got this war against terrorism, which is just a slogan which means absolutely nothing. There is no war against terrorism. Terrorism is just a tool for a political goal. So if you want to do a war against something, it has to be against the political goal, and then it can make sense. Then in this case, you have to do a war, and I think the war is actually the good term, but you have to have an ideological battle against here some Muslim extremism, Islamist extremism, and I think that's something which is legit. There is good reason, but that will be based on your own political compass, and that's the case for many terrorist action. You will support it basically if you believe in the values, in the political goal for which it has been used, and you will condemn it when you are against the goals being waged, the goal behind the action. So I think Battle Royale 2 is interesting from this point of view. Unfortunately, it completely failed in its message, because at the end of the day, there is no clear political goal behind the actions of the hero of the film, and so at the end it's almost counterproductive. It shows the characters being terrorists just for the sake of being terrorists, and not with having clear idea of what they want to build after why they are using this violent, dangerous tool that is terrorism in order to build a new society, a better society. But there is no clear idea of what is this better society they are trying to build. And so at the end, the film just doesn't say anything. It's actually, in my opinion, saying the opposite of what it wants to say. It's promoting terrorism for the sake of terrorism, and that's clearly not the right thing to do, and it makes no sense. And that's why at the end of the day, I think Battle Royale 2 Requiem is a failure on many aspects. For the part of Sonny Chiba, it's just a small cameo, so it's good to have him here, as he was the the main actor of Fukasaku in most of his filmography. So it's great that they have been able to be together one last time, but it's just a cameo. If I remember correctly, he's playing the father of one of the main character, young hero we follow. So it's nice to have him here, but not much to say. Actually, I think it would have been better if Sonny Chiba had played the part of the teacher, so the new teacher, the one replacing Takeshi Kitano in the original film, who is played here by Riki Takeuchi, so the actor from Deadly Outlaw Rekka. On contrary to Deadly Outlaw Rekka, where he was kind of sober, where he was fairly in control of his emotions, in Battle Royale 2 he is completely over the top. He's overacting like a beast, which can be funny but may not have been for the best of the film. And I think if Sonny Chiba had played the character of the teacher, that may have been more interesting. That would have given more screen presence to him in the first place, and I'm sure he could have done a better job. That would probably not have saved the film, which ended up, as I said, being a failure, but still that would have made it slightly better at the very least. But so yeah, Battle Royale 2, disappointing ending to the career of Kinji Fukasaku, and not a great film in any case, unfortunately. The same year, after having failed to conquer Hollywood, Hollywood came to him with Kill Bill, directed by Quentin Tarantino. So I'm sure all of you already know about Kill Bill, so I won't really spend a lot of time about it. Sonny Chiba is playing Hattori Hanzo, who is a swordsmith who is going to help the bride in her quest for revenge, and who is going to give her the katana she would be using to kill the one who have been her former friends. Unfortunately, there is not much to say, in my opinion, about it, because it's great to see Sonny Chiba in Kill Bill, which is one of the last really good Quentin Tarantino film, in my opinion. I'm not that convinced by what he has been trying to do since Inglourious Basterds, since Django, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, trying to mix a bit of serious drama and violence. I prefer when he really assumes doing entertainment, really going into action over the top, and just assume doing that, and not trying to give you a bigger story on more serious tones. But anyway, that's just me. I know he has his fans, and there are some people who like what he's trying to do with these more recent films. But anyway, Kill Bill is a great film. I really enjoy it, and I think any fans of Asian cinema will enjoy it, because it's full of nods, full of references to Hong Kong and Japanese cinema, and so that's a joy to watch. You also have great action scenes thanks to Yuan Wu Ping, thanks to the creativity of Tarantino when it comes to that, and you also have a lot of great actors, Gordon Liu, Sonny Chiba, so it's always a pleasure to see them on the screen, even if their parts are fairly limited. Especially in the case of Sonny Chiba, he has no fight scene or anything. He's just playing this kind of mentor to the bride. Great to see him. Great to have him in a big production, especially after the B, C, or even D movie he had made in the US in the early 90s, and that also helped to elevate his profile in the world. So that's all good. That's all good to see him there in a film which is quite a good film from Tarantino. So all good on many aspects, and so great to have him here. The following year, in 2005, he is in Survive Style 5+, directed by Gen Sekiguchi. It's a quite emblematic film of the new generation of Japanese filmmakers, I would say. So very video clip style, a bit under influence of people like Quentin Tarantino. So it's very visual, a lot of crazy ideas. It doesn't necessarily work that well because it's a lot of different stories which sometimes have difficulty to connect with each other's. but it's a movie which is mostly made for entertainment and which is very creative when it comes to its visual style, to have a lot of weird characters, and it really delivers when it comes to this aspect. It's very quirky, it's very witty, it's a lot of weird stuff which are quite entertaining, and there is a real visual sense from the director, from Sekiguchi, who comes from the commercial world, and so he managed to deliver a movie which is very colorful, which is very fun, and which will have a good time for you if you are ready to watch it. The casting is also quite interesting, with Hiroshi Abe, who would become one of the main actors, one of the main stars of Japanese cinema around that period of time. We also have Vinnie Jones, who is a regular from Guy Ritchie film in a very funny part, always going around with the translator and having weird questions, having weird things going on, which is the main idea of this film, having a lot of characters thrown in weird situations and ended up doing even weirder stuff in order to escape from them. Sonny Chiba has a very small part, some kind of luxury cameo, I would say, where he's playing the boss of a medicine factory who has hired one of the characters who is working with a commercial creative, and so in order to have some commercial being made for his company. And so that's fun to see the exchange between Sonny Chiba and the other characters present, especially as he is always harassed by his wife, who is calling him, and he has to become this more submissive man during this exchange, and then become once again the boss of his company when he's commenting about the commercial which is proposed to him. So that makes for some fun exchange. That's quite nice. The movie is a lot of fun in itself, so there is no reason to not enjoy this one, enjoy this little part of Sonny Chiba, and have a good time watching Survive Style 5+. In 2006, Sonny Chiba is in Legend of the Seven Monks, also called Master of Thunder, directed by Kenji Tanigaki. And Kenji Tanigaki is now more famous for being the right-hand man of Donnie Yen, or for being the man behind the great action scenes of the Rurouni Kenshin live trilogy. But he was originally someone trained by Yasuaki Kurata. So Yasuaki Kurata, we already talked a lot about him for films like Executioners or Dragon Princess. He is the martial artist, the Japanese martial artist of Hong Kong cinema. And he also did several films in Japan. He also produced some. He also trained some Japanese stuntmen and actors, and Kenji Tanigaki was one of them. And then he moved to Hong Kong, where he became a stuntman, where he became an action director by himself, and becoming the right-hand man of Donnie Yen. And so Master of Thunder is the first film he directed as a full-time director, and that's at last the final confrontation, the first and final reunion of Yasuaki Kurata and Sonny Chiba on the screen. If you remember, in the first installment and the second installment of this retrospective, I complained about the fact that while there were Sonny Chiba and Yasuaki Kurata were in the same film, they never really had a fight together, they never really shared the screen together. And finally, with Master of Thunder, we have this meeting of the two legends of Japanese action cinema. And so for this reason alone, Master of Thunder, I guess, is a must-see. That's an historical moment for the Japanese action cinema. Unfortunately, the film itself is not very good. There is a lot of comedy which is not that great. The film had a lot of problems when it comes to budget, and so that may play a part. The meeting of Kurata and Chiba is historic, is great, at least if you are a fan of the two actors and you know who they are. But it's a bit lackluster, we have to admit it, because obviously they are not in their prime anymore. and so the director Kenji Tanigaki had to use a bit of double and things like this. And the movie has also a fantasy background, so there is this element thrown in, and so that's not the fight, the meeting as we wanted it to be, obviously, but that's fairly understandable. We are in 2006. We are not in the 70s when these guys were at their best, so you can't expect them to deliver the same way as they would have been able to 30 years ago. Still, I think it's worth checking the film just for the sake of having those two titans together in one frame, but don't expect much because unfortunately Master of Thunder is a fairly disappointing film. I jump to 2012 with Sushi Girl by Ken Saxton, so another American film for Sonny Chiba, where he has a very, very limited part. It's once again more like a cameo more than anything else, in the same spirit as his cameo as in Kill Bill, but even reduced actually compared to Kill Bill. He is a sushi restaurant owner, and he's also playing some kind of driver at the very end, for a film which is in the same vein as what Tarantino did with Reservoir Dogs, so having several characters in the same place, and they have to find who has betrayed them. They have to find where is the money of Ace they did several years ago, and so there is going to be a lot of verbal exchange with a lot of vulgarity and wit sometimes, and also a lot of torture in order to extract the informations needed. You have a lot of familiar faces of American cinema, of supporting actors. You have Tony Todd, for example, the Candyman. You have Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, who is almost unrecognizable in this film. So a lot of these familiar faces of American cinema for a film which, in my opinion, is trying a bit too hard to be this Tarantino cool, and which is really going too far sometimes in the violence and vulgarity just to try to create its own personality, but it's just too much sometimes. It feels not really needed for the story itself, and it's just in order to try to look cool that they are doing it. So at the end of the day, it's not a bad film. It's still great to see those actors all together, but it's obviously not as inspired as its model, as its Tarantino subgenre, let's put it this way. So it's not as great as a Tarantino film, obviously. And if you are watching it for Sonny Chiba, I mean, just don't, because he really has a very, very small part. There is not much which can be said of him for this film. And the last film I'm going to talk about is made in 2015. It's April Fools, directed by Junichi Ishikawa, and it's a big comedy drama film which is supposed to be a feel-good film with different stories, with different characters who are having serious trouble in their life, and who will, fortunately, thanks to interactions with other characters, will find a way to look at their life through a different angle, and who will manage to solve their inner problems and finally end up on a good note and reorientate their life in a good way. So it's a feel-good movie with a mix of comedy and drama, and which is quite well made, quite successful. You care for the characters which are shown in the film, and you finally have a good time watching them and see them take the right direction in their life. Sonny Chiba is playing his usual Yakuza boss here. It's a cameo once more. He's playing golf, and he appears almost at the end of the film, so it's great to see him like punctuate the storyline of one of the main characters, and to see him there. But once again, not much can be said of his performance, because he's just there like 30 seconds. So nice to see him in a movie which is quite okay, which is fairly recommended if you want something which is not action, which you want a drama, a comedy, which has a lot of good vibe. And so it's with this film that I finish this retrospective, this first part of the retrospective of Sonny Chiba, and I have finally discussed about all the films I've seen with Sonny Chiba. I hope you find it interesting. In order to conclude this video, I will just do a quick sum up of the 8 most interesting films of Sonny Chiba's career, the 8 films which in my opinion you should watch if you want to see the best, the very best of Sonny Chiba's career. The first of this film is Game of Chance, which is a Ninkyo film, a Yakuza film where the characters are chivalrous, where they are trying to do good, but they also have to oppose against the bad Yakuza, and they have to put their life on the line in order to do the good thing around them. And what is especially interesting in Game of Chance, aside from the fact of seeing a very young but already charismatic Sonny Chiba, it's the relationship he has with his son. He has a son which he wants to raise the right way. He wants the best for him, and for that he has to confront his activity as a Yakuza, the people he is dealing with, and the relationship between him and his son, which is played by a very young Hiroyuki Sanada, is extremely touching, and that's really the emotional art of this film, and it's really one of his best dramatic performance because of this super touching relationship between him and Hiroyuki Sanada. The second film I really recommend is Memoirs of Japanese Assassins, directed by Sadao Nakajima. So a film which shows the very troubled political life of Japan during the Meiji and Taisho era, in which Sonny Chiba plays a much more weak character than what we are used to, a character who is confused, who is lost, and who is going to find in this political cause of the time a way forward in his life, and which would transform him into an assassin. One of the most interesting performances from Sonny Chiba when it comes to drama, for a film which is also one of the very best from its director Sadao Nakajima. The third film I'm going to advise you is Yakuza Wolf. Yakuza Wolf, a very dark film where Sonny Chiba is trying to take revenge for the death of his family and a group of Yakuza, and is going to suffer a lot in order to achieve his goal, but he's also going to make a lot of people suffer around him. So a movie, as I said, extremely dark, with some kind of spaghetti western vibe, very close to what Sergio Corbucci was doing with his Django, and with an interesting direction, very interesting dark atmosphere made by the director, weird angles, really very creative, very imaginative direction, with the beginning of Sonny Chiba as an anti-hero. So Yakuza Wolf, a very strong recommendation, one of the great gem of his career, which is not known enough in my opinion. The fourth recommendation is of course The Street Fighter. The Street Fighter is one of its most famous film ever. The time for Sonny Chiba to really embrace this anti-hero persona, with also the karate being thrown, transforming him into an icon of the Japan action cinema, with this karate master who has no moral standards, who is only selfish, cynical, and which is a joy to watch from the beginning to the end, in a movie which is really emblematic of the exploitation trend in Japan of the time. And while in Street Fighter he was playing this kind of anti-hero, then we also have Shaolin Karate, which is the fifth recommendation of this selection, which is kind of the positive opposite of the Street Fighter, in which he's playing Doshinso, the founder of the Shoinji Kempo style, one of the best martial arts film made in Japan, with a much more positive message compared to a film like The Street Fighter, where the martial arts are shown in the positive light and are making society a better place, are helping people transform themselves and becoming a good person, and with also some really nice action scenes, some great display of his karate skills by Sonny Chiba. The sixth recommendation is Shogun Samurai, when Kinji Fukasaku apply his expertise of Hitsurogu, of this realistic Yakuza film, to period historical film, and that's for a great mix. It's really working very well, a movie with a lot of charismatic characters, with a lot of high production value, and with Sonny Chiba Imperial playing Yagyu Jubei, one of the most famous samurai of the Japanese pop culture. He is just commanding in every scene he appears, and is a joy to watch. So of course Shogun Samurai is a must-see in his filmography. The seventh must-see in Sonny Chiba filmography is G.I. Samurai, a story of time travel in which we have some super impressive battle scenes, in which we have an interesting take on the concept of time paradox, and we also have a very interesting development of the characters played by Sonny Chiba, Major Iba, who will embrace the value of the samurai when he is back in the Sengoku era, in the time of the Civil War in Japan. And so great production value, great story, and great performance, great character for Sonny Chiba, which makes G.I. Samurai a must-see for any Chiba fan. And the last film to recommend is Shogun's Shadow. Shogun's Shadow, the last hooray for the Japan Action Club, the film in which they are able to show the most their mastery, to show their creativity, their capacity, their skills when it comes to deliver action scenes, and an action fest, and something which will be memorable for any fan of Japan action cinema, and with Sonny Chiba, who is the final boss and who clearly shows that he is the boss of Japanese action cinema in general. He was, he is, and he will probably remain for the decades to follow. So Shogun's Shadow, a very must in Sonny Chiba's career. And that's it. That's really the end for Sonny Chiba. I hope you have found this retrospective interesting. I hope you have been able to follow until the end, and I hope some of the recommendations I made you will follow, and you will try to see the films, and you will through this exploration appreciate even more the greatness of Sonny Chiba, one of the greatest stars of Japanese cinema, and certainly, as I said, the greatest star of Japanese action cinema. Hopefully I will find you in another retrospective, which I hope will be also a bit less long than this one. Once again, I hope you enjoy, and take care, and hope to see you very soon on the next video of the House of Asian Cinema.